Chapter 1, The Field of the Fallen. July, 1948, near Socorro, New Mexico. Holding the two nails firmly with his front teeth, Allen Larkin glanced behind him towards the south, scowling at the dark gray July sky. He turned around and quickly resumed pounding in the rest of the nails that weren't yet flat enough with the surface of the wooden boards. Behind him, the fading evening sky was a stunning mixture of every color imaginable, bright yellow and orange in the west, dark blue and purple in the east, combined with a swirling mixture of black and gray in between the two. "Looks like it's fixin' to storm tonight, JJ," said the young burly red-haired man as he continued nailing down the last of the boards for the north fence. "It's coming up fast from down south around Las Cruces, it looks like. We'd better finish this up soon and put everything away before the storm hits, don't you think?" Allen suggested, glancing over at friend Jim, who was busy firming down the dirt around one of the fence posts for the final section of fencing with his shovel. Jim paused, looked around at the sky and grinned. He dearly loved the monsoon season. "Yeah, I guess you're right, Al, just about time to call it a day here," said Jim, eyeing critically the clouds building up from the south. "We've got about another half hour, I'd say." Jim Thompson, or JJ to most his friends, was a few inches on the taller side of Allen and somewhat willowy in stature, but obviously the two young men were quite adapted to the sort of work they were doing. Jim, having recently celebrated his 26th birthday, was the older of the two, with 3 years of college under his belt before being drafted after the outbreak of the war in '43. Jim had been selected as part of the electronics team that worked at Los Alamos, chosen from a long list of names for his knowledge and expertise in working with radios and electronic circuits. Jim's best friend Allen Larkin also worked at Los Alamos during the war, selected for his construction skills in building whatever type of buildings or other needs they would have for the gadget, as it was officially referred to. Jim had a pretty good idea it was some kind of atomic bomb. He remembered many of his physics professors discussing the theoretical possibilities of building such a thing in the months before the war started. He understood the basics, but had no idea of exactly just how it was all going to work. Jim was familiar with some of the big-name physicists who were running the project up there, and he knew they were some of the best minds in the country. Jim, it seemed, had worked hard to have even earned a B- in physics at the University of New Mexico. Suffice to say, he knew those men were way out of his league. "All I have left to do is finish up these fence posts here so I don't have to mess with that in the morning. I'm afraid if it does rain tonight it's going to be awful muggy tomorrow morning when we get back out here," Jim said, as he continued working the wooden fence posts into place. The two young men had become best friends during their work at Los Alamos. Allen was like a brother to Jim. Together, they had decided that as soon as the war was over, they would pool their savings, buy some open land in New Mexico, and follow a dream that they talked about during the war of building a ranch, raising horses and cattle, and living a simpler life. With the barn nearly complete, finishing up this fence would be one more step to bringing them closer to their dream. As the two busied themselves finishing up their work for the day and putting everything back in the barn, the wind had began to pick up and they could see lightning flashes coming from the south. The storm was getting much closer. Counting the time interval between the flashes and thunder told them they had about 10 or 15 minutes to get finished up, get in the truck and head back to the main road before the storm hit. The old Dodge pickup truck squeaked and squawked as they traversed the primitive dirt road back to the main highway. The flashes and thunder were getting much closer now. Allen was struggling to keep the truck on the roadway as the winds increased and the wheel jumped every time he went over a rock or bump in the road. "We sure got a doozy of a storm, and it's moving in fast." Allen was just about to reach down and turn on his headlights, when out of the corner of his eye he noticed a sudden bright flash of light, but there was no sound. "Strange, where's the thunder?" he thought. He barely had time to slam on the brakes as something flew across the road in front of them. "Damn, did you see that, JJ?" Allen barked. His eyes widened as he continued wrestling with the steering wheel and trying desperately to keep the truck from going off the road and sliding down the hill. Jim was too stunned to answer, trying to keep both eyes on the road, as well as straining to identify what it was he just saw through the dirty windshield of the old truck. "Stop right here, Al," Jim cried out, motioning to Allen where to stop the truck. "Maybe it's one of those new jets they've been testing out at Alamogordo." Jim added, shooting a concerned glance at his friend as if at any moment he might not be able to stop the truck in time to keep from going over the hill. Whatever it is, I think it just landed at the bottom of the hill over there. Allen pointed to the place where he supposed it landed, but with the fading light, along with the dust and wind blowing things around outside, it was getting difficult to see. Allen stopped the truck, turned off the engine, and the two men stepped out of the truck and looked down the hill. Al, go grab the old med kit from behind the seat. I'm going down to take a look. If it's a plane crash, someone might need our help. I'll grab the flashlights, Jim said as he wrestled two flashlights from under the seat, slamming the door and tossing one of them to Allen as he proceeded trotting down the hill. Allen took the flashlight and continued looking around in the truck for the med kit. Hopefully it's in here, Allen mumbled half to himself while digging around behind the front seats. There you are, found you, he said to himself as he finally found his prize. The two men cautiously continued down the hill, peering ahead through the blowing dust, wind and fading light with their flashlights, being careful to avoid the low bushes as well as watching for any snakes that might be around. The hill sloped gently down into a dry riverbed which was about 1/4 of a mile from the dirt road behind them where the truck was. Halfway down the hill, in the beam of their flashlights, they noticed 3 deep grooves cut into the soil roughly 7 feet apart and about 1 foot deep. The two men shared a worried glance as each picked up their pace. Landing wheels, I'll bet, Allen mumbled out loud as they trotted down the hill. I don't think so, Al, too even and too shallow, maybe part of the fuselage did that. I think I see something in the riverbed down there. Jim ran well ahead of his friend, then came to a sudden and abrupt stop at what he found. Holding tighter now to his flashlight, he shined the beam of light around the perimeter of, well, whatever it was, trying to size it up in its entirety. It was a smooth and silvery, metallic-looking object, about 60 or 70 feet long, shiniest metal he'd ever seen and somewhat oval in its shape. It was featureless, with the exception of some raised sections on what he guessed was the tail end of the object. What the hell is it, JJ? Allen asked. No wings, no markings, no wheels, no, nothing. Allen paused to see what his friend's reaction was. It's like no plane I've ever seen, JJ. Allen stopped short of the object, continuing to size it up and mumbling to himself while apparently in no great hurry to check the object out any further. In the meantime, he saw his friend running around to the far side of the object with the flashlight, looking for God knows what, he thought. Hey JJ, you remember those guys over in Roswell last summer who said they found an alien spaceship? Yep, I remember. They changed their story later on too, if I recall. High-altitude weather balloons, they said it was. Jim added, looking the craft up and down for something familiar. Well, this is no weather balloon, I'll tell you that right now, said Allen. As Jim stepped cautiously around to one side, he noticed a small oblong opening on one side of the object. Gently tapping around the opening with the butt of his flashlight, he noticed it had no apparent gaps around it. Shining his light along the hull of the object, he saw no other handles or openings. However, it did seem as if this small opening was conveniently made about the size of a hand to reach into. Carefully placing his hand inside the opening, with his fingers he felt a handle and gently pulled. Almost seamlessly, a larger panel opened up on the side of the object and gently rose up into the air. A door, Jim thought, but to where? What's going on over there? Allen cried out. Hey Jim, maybe we should wait and go into town and get the sheriff and bring he and his men out here. Wouldn't that be a good idea, don't you think? Allen suggested anxiously. Allen, knowing his friend too well, wasn't expecting him to wait for help. I think I've found a way to get inside this thing, Jim spoke up with a grin, straining to be heard as the gusts of wind and dirt blowing around now was making normal conversation increasingly difficult. At least, I think it's a door, said Jim, too quietly for Allen to hear. Look around on the other side and see if you can find any openings. He shouted to Allen, using his flashlight to direct his point. Allen moved to the opposite side of the object while continuing to wage a protest, yelling out to him something about curiosity killing the cat, but Jim could barely hear him with the roaring of the wind. Too late. Allen thought, as could see that Jim was already stepping into an opening of some sort. Jim slowly worked his way down the narrow hallway to the apparent midpoint of the ship. Using his flashlight to examine the sides, floor and ceiling as he went along, he noticed some strange markings and symbols embedded into a strip along the upper edge of each wall just below the ceiling. Jim reached a corridor roughly 10 feet inside the interior of the ship, when he turned slowly and began to make his way in the direction he considered likely to be the front or bow of the aircraft. As he turned, he heard a smooth whooshing sound from the corridor behind and to his left. Looking back, he was greeted with the bright beam of a flashlight shining in his face from the far end of the corridor on the opposite side of the ship. "Darn it, JJ," I said. "Wait." Allen scolded him, looking around with his flashlight into the interior of the ship. "You find anything yet?" Allen asked. "Nope, just these weird symbols along the tops of the walls." Jim reached up to show Allen, and tapped lightly on one of the symbols. Chirp, chirp. The sudden sound startled both of them as the symbol began to glow, first bright yellow, then changing to a softer greenish color. The chirping sound continued at regular intervals every few seconds. Allen and Jim both stared at each other for a few seconds, startled. "For crying out loud, JJ, be careful what you're poking at," Allen pleaded. I will," Jim nervously answered. "I'm going up front and take a look around." "Well, be careful, I don't think this is one of ours, if you know what I mean," Allen emphasized. They both paused, staring at each other and looking around. "In fact, I'm beginning to think we should stop where we are and get the hell out of here," Allen suggested, looking around uneasily as he spoke. "I have a feeling that this may be one of them UFOs we've been hearing stories about," said Jim, as he continued his examination. "I'm beginning to think you're right," mumbled a worried Allen. "Well, there's only one way to be sure," Jim said. He slowly continued to make his way forward in the ship, as the hallway that he had been walking though began to widen a bit more to reveal a larger room with dozens of slots in the walls, along with more of the strange symbols embedded in the strips along the top. Allen hesitantly followed Jim from behind. "I really wish you would listen to me, JJ," his voice nervously trailed off. "It's too dark and quiet in here, this place is giving me the creeps," Allen whispered nervously from somewhere behind Jim in the corridor. "I'm finding more of those weird symbols," Allen added. "Yeah, so quiet I can hear my heart pounding in my chest," Jim added. Just then, Jim thought he heard some sounds of movement coming from the front of the ship. He hastened his pace. "Occupants, survivors," he wondered. Within a few seconds the corridor finally ended as he entered the forward compartment of the ship. If there were any doubts as to the nature of this ship, they were quickly ended as Jim and Allen both entered the room one after the other, shining their flashlights around. For the first time, they could see out through several windows and panels running from the ceiling to the front area of the room. Through these windows they could see outside, the winds increasingly blowing the trees around interspersed with the occasional flashes of lightning, but still there was absolute silence inside. There were panels all around, some dimly lit, while others were completely dark. Again, there were those strange symbols everywhere. Jim began immediately inspecting the 3 chairs, each held human-like occupants who were as silent as the room. As Jim began to make his way around to the middle chair, he heard a soft moan. He brought his light up to finally get a glimpse of the occupant, holding his breath, not quite ready for what he might see. "Holy cow, it looks like a kid," he softly whispered, with some surprise. Quickly taking his light, he continued to examine the other 2 occupants in the side chairs. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered again, a little louder this time. Jim's reactions quickly brought Allen up to the front to see for himself. At this the pilot in middle moved and groaned a bit louder than before. "Al, bring me up that med kit, and hurry," cried Jim. Allen hurried back to grab the first aid kit he had left by the side door as he came in. When he returned, he could see what had startled his friend. "You think they're alive?" Allen asked. Jim grabbed the first aid kit and opened it, grabbing a stethoscope from the top of the kit. The kit was a leftover that they had hung onto from the camp supplies at Los Alamos. They had some pretty complete med kits up there, and some kits were even fitted out with Geiger counters as well. He took the stethoscope and examined each of the pilots. As he looked over each one, he noticed the peculiar differences as well as similarities in their appearance. They looked almost, but not quite human. "I think I've got heartbeats on them, real faint on these two," he motioned to the two on the outside. "But fairly strong on this one here." Jim indicated the middle pilot. "But notice the way they look?" Jim asked. "They look so young," he observed. "Yeah, like short, hairless kids," said Allen. "But yet, not kids." "Do you think?" Allen paused. "You think they're human?" he asked. "I can't really say for sure yet," Jim offered, scratching his head and looking around inside the cockpit for something that might help explain this whole situation. "But I have a feeling, if we don't get these folks some help or do something here real quick, we're going to lose them, especially these two." He motioned to the other two pilots on the side chairs. Suddenly, Jim felt something grab onto his wrist tightly. It was the middle pilot, and his eyes were open and staring straight at him. He had huge, dark brown eyes with no apparent pupils and no distinct iris, which glowed in the light of his flashlight. "Like looking into cat's eyes," thought Jim. "Who are you?" said a voice from out of nowhere. Jim thought he heard a voice, or did he? He wondered. He froze for a second or two, not sure what to say next. "I'm Jim Thompson, and this here," he motioned with his free hand and flashlight to Allen. "This here is my friend Allen Larkin. We saw your plane crash as we were coming over the top of the hill and we came down here to see if we could help you. Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes, thank you for trying to help us, but you must leave, it is too dangerous for you," said the voice of the pilot. Again Jim wondered where the voice was coming from since the pilot's mouth was not moving. The pilot then glanced over at the other two occupants and Allen, who was examining them. "My name is Reevan, we have been studying your planet," he breathed heavily as if in some discomfort. "We were just completing our final mission when we were caught in this electrical storm, most violent," said Reevan. "We call them monsoon storms around here. They are typical for this time of year," Jim added, staring at Reevan, trying to decide whether he was human or not. "And yes, they can get pretty nasty. I sense your strong curiosity about our appearance," said Reevan. "We are, you might say, distant cousins." Reevan reached into a slot next to his seat, tapped a few symbols that were below it, and it opened up. A small crystal sphere eased upward, floating out of a brightly lit slot. Reevan gently reached out and took hold of the floating sphere and placed it gently into Jim's hands. "Here, you must take this, keep it with you. It contains vital information about your world, the others must have it. You will learn to communicate with it and it with you. Guard it and keep it safe, it could save your world." Reevan finally spoke, this time as a man. Jim heard him speak. "You must leave now, they are searching for us," said Reevan, who had suddenly reached over and began tapping some of the symbols on the sides of his chair as more flashing symbols appeared on the panels near the front windows. Reevan read them quickly, looking quite agitated at their meanings. Jim looked around at all the panels on the chairs, then on the windows in front. Not being able to read the symbols' meaning at all was not necessary, since in any language, their message was clear: it was time to leave. "Allen, let's get these three out of here, quick." He looked at Reevan. "Here, let us help you," Jim said, trying to reassure Reevan that he was trying to help him. "Who are the others you keep speaking of? Should we wait for them?" No, leave us here, you must go. Take the sphere with you. It will help my people find you when they return, we thank you for your concern." Reevan paused, looking over at Allen as if attempting a slight smile. "Go now please, not much time, ship may self-destruct any moment, you two must hurry. The others are looking for us." Reevan then turned to the panels and began tapping something more on them, and immediately there was a loud noise as the roaring of a train, along with several chimes and chirping sounds all going off simultaneously. "Let's get out of here, Al," Jim yelled frantically over the sounds. "Now," he yelled. Grabbing his flashlight, he began hastily making his way back down the pathway he had entered, and then jumping outside the ship, Jim turned to wait for his friend Allen to come out. It had turned dark outside now and the rain had begun to fall in huge drops along with the wind and lightning all around. Jim kept his flashlight trained on the entrance to the ship as he waited. He saw Allen's face for just a moment near the exit, and then Allen anxiously froze. "Sorry JJ, I forgot the med kit," Allen yelled. "Go on up and start the truck, I'll be there in a second." Allen turned and quickly went back inside before Jim could wage a protest and stop his friend. Before Jim could do or say anything more, he noticed a bright shimmering glow building up around the entire spacecraft. The glow of light consumed the entire ship in a matter of seconds as if the ship were on fire. Then as suddenly as it started, in an instant it was over, the ship had completely vanished, taking his best friend Allen along with it.